Today, we have with us professor at Western University of Media Studies, the knower of all things comic books, film, television, anything pop culture, Professor Selma Purac. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk a little bit about consumerism, capitalism, and its ties to cartoons and animation, especially looking back in the the Gen X generation. I assume that we're relatively in the same age, but we're also looking at like that generation of latchkey kids, the ones that were pretty much raised behind the TV.
Right.
In the Reagan era too, where I think a lot of these regulations were lifted and changed.
Right.
So even before your career as a professor at Western University, bring us back to your childhood. What were the things that you were watching as a kid? What were the things that you grew up with?
Well, I had older brothers, so He-Man was really, really big in our family, and all my cousins were male as well, and they were all into the He-Man merchandise. So that was kind of my thing. My parents were sort of concerned that I was engaging with so much male-based media, so they ensured that I had loads of Barbies to kind of counterbalance that. And then, of course, My Little Pony was really big with me as well. Weirdly enough, I liked a lot of the old Hanna-Barbera stuff from like the 1960s. So Flintstones, the Jetsons.
That was me. That was my jam. Flintstones was it.
Totally. My all-time favorite though was Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Scooby-Doo. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Like Professor Selma. It was Professor Selma.
Oh,
yeah, and I would have gotten away with it too.
Amazing.
If it weren't for you snooping kids.
It's fantastic. It's amazing.
Whatever happened to the theme songs of back in the day? Why do you think they made such great like mini music videos? Obviously to get the kids going, but I mean it's that song, the earworm that gets stuck in your head.
Totally. Well, and that's exactly why it actually works, right? I can remember like all of those theme songs.
All right, so simple. We're gonna have to go through all of them. What was your like favorite cartoon theme song?
Well, Scooby-Doo. It had to be. It absolutely I would sing it for you, but your ears would bleed, so I'm not going to do that. But
we have to do the Follow the Bouncing Ball karaoke Scooby-Doo sing-along. But yeah, totally a device, you would say, that was used to kind of obviously get you in. There's a theme song. Not just cartoons, but I feel like across the board. I mean, like the Knight Rider theme song. A-Team had a great theme song. Everything from the 80s was a music video influenced and inspired, I feel.
Totally.
Now, we talked about the theme song. Now we're going to look at programs in general. Program length commercials. Is that a term that you're aware of, or is that something you can expand on with us and the viewers?
So a program length commercial is essentially when you have a program that acts as a commercial for the products that appear within it. So what you end up having here is a commercial that is 30 minutes long, but it's disguised as a TV program. So you've got toy-based television. This partly has to do with the way in which TV shows are produced. So in the 1980s, the concept of having a TV show that is an advertisement is really literalized. Back in the day, the relationship between toys and television was such that the TV show would come out first, and then based on its success, you would license that TV show and merchandise would emerge. So a lot of the old 1960s Hanna-Barbera cartoons fall into that category. Things like the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and Scooby-Doo.
Flintstone vitamins.
Exactly. A great example of that. But what the PLC does is it reverses the system. So rather than start with the TV show, you actually start with pre-existing merchandise. And then in order to sell that merchandise, you create a TV show. So one of the best examples of this, hands down, is He-Man. He-Man is a little worried in the 1980s because Kenner is doing so well. Kenner has the Star Wars contract, and they're making buckets of money. Mattel, who initially turned down the Star Wars contract,
are kicking themselves in the head.
Totally kicking themselves. And so they, as you can imagine, they're especially keen to create the next big popular action figure. So what they come up with is an action figure that is going to form a kind of contrast to Star Wars, which is ruling the marketplace. So if you think about a Star Wars action figure, they're 3 3/4 inches in size. They're pretty static in terms of their shape because they're articulated, so you can move their parts.
Yeah, but they never really bent at the knees.
Yeah, exactly. So they're actually really kind of straight-laced physically. And then they have expressionless blank faces. So what Mattel comes up with is He-Man, right? He's very physically distinct from the Star Wars figures. He's 5.5 inches in size. He's got this kind of massive masculine physique, so he looks like he could eat Luke Skywalker. And he's placed in an action pose, and he's got this really aggressive expression on his face. So he's totally, totally different. And when Mattel actually goes about pitching the line to toy distributors, they go to Toys R Us, the #1 toy distributor, then they go to Child World as well, and they say, are you interested in our He-Man line? And what these guys say is, sure, but what's going to sell the line? Star Wars has a movie. What does He-Man have? And they toy with the idea of creating a free comic book series that they would package with the figurines. But as Toys R Us points out, they say if you're targeting children ages 5 and up, they're not going to be reading comic books. So Mattel actually goes to Filmation and they say, we'd like to create 2 one-hour specials to provide children with the backstory of this toy line. What they discover is that a syndicated series is roughly the same cost, so they go that route. So what we have here is a program that is literally based on the toy. The toy comes first, and the reason the TV show emerges is for the sole purpose of selling the merchandise. All of those classic cartoons from the 1980s follow this pattern. So we see it with G.I. Joe, we see it with Transformers with My Little Pony, with the Care Bears, Strawberry Shortcake. The nature of the pre-existing merchandise might shift, but it's always that the TV show is a secondary factor designed to sell the merchandise.
It's insane how that was the model. That was it, right? That was toys first, storyline later.
Absolutely, and it totally worked. I mean, in the case of Strawberry Shortcake and Care Bears, they actually started with American greeting cards. So they were characters to sell greeting cards. And then based on their success, they went on to be, well, in the case of Strawberry Shortcake, she was an Atari game. In the case of Care Bears, they were like plush furry animals. And then because that merch was selling so well, we end up with TV specials, cartoon series, and even feature-length films.
Yeah, but to this day.
Yeah, to this day, exactly. Well, that's what I mean, right? Like the 1980s, we actually established this pattern. People are really, really concerned about it, and it's completely normalized today. Today, it's all about whether or not something is toyetic. It would be absurd, like incomprehensible, to create a TV show that had no merchandise attached to it.
So we're gonna go back to the birth of the PLC and the perfect storm of latchkey kids and the deregularization of TV.
Right.
So, like, I mean, how could it have been done any other way than this? I mean...
Well, it was so perfectly planned from the get-go. So if you look at the majority of the narratives that we actually find in these 1980s PLCs, they are narratives that are designed to engage with the mindset of the Gen X child. Now, stories about security and about power, I mean, these are characteristics that appeal to children of any generation. But if we actually think about Gen Xers, they're in an especially vulnerable position. And so these narratives resonate to a much greater degree. So take Strawberry Shortcake, for example. Here you've got a character that revolves around like a strawberry of all things. But what market research actually demonstrated was that little Gen X girls actually felt a sense of security and affection for strawberries. So to wrap a show around strawberries means that you're offering children this fantasy of security and affection that they feel they don't have in real life. Or take He-Man in this respect. So He-Man is a character who doesn't seem to have parents. Like, his parents never appear in the series, but he constructs a surrogate family for himself. And he's Prince Adam with the cowardly Cringer as a cat. And all he has to do is take up the magic sword, say the magic words.
By the power of Grayskull.
There we go. I have the power. And suddenly he's transformed. He's He-Man and Cringer is Battle Cat. I mean, these two narratives taken together are narratives that revolve around the desire for security and affection and the desire for power, things that Gen X latchkey kids in particular feel that they lack in their lives. And the cartoons provide them with access to these fantasies. When you actually merchandise those narratives, it means that they're not just engaging with the fantasy when they're sitting in front of the television for half an hour. They can carry those toys around and continue carrying those feelings of affection and power, like wherever they take their He-Man figure with them.
It's almost like how Ghostbusters did really well as a cartoon. And, you know, originally, I mean, if you watch the first movie, you know, it was definitely these ex-Saturday Night Live stars doing their version of, like, the Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, Ghost Chasers kind of model, but more modern.
Right.
And then they make the animated series, which allows kids to face their fears of ghosts or the supernatural or the unknown. And, by the way, having a proton pack and that cool car also helped. But I mean, I feel like that's almost what drove the sequel. I don't think they really wanted to make a sequel, but based off of the success of the cartoon, they made Ghostbusters 2. And if you notice, Janine in that cartoon, like, she completely changed how she looked in the first movie. She looked more like the cartoon character in the second film. And, you know, and then they jazzed up the car. They even made the logo different. So what were the toys that you always wanted?
I wanted more toys. I think that was the thing. So,
didn't matter which ones as long as you had them all?
Yeah, my parents were really, really restrictive, actually, in terms of what they wanted to buy for us. My brothers had, like, the He-Man things, all of those action figures, but I really wanted Castle Grayskull. It just seemed so impressive in all of the advertisements, but they never budged. But thankfully, my cousin actually had it, so we would go over to their place.
How many Castle Grayskulls do you think are sitting in a warehouse that were never bought? Because I think everyone had the toys, everyone had the action figures. Maybe you were lucky if you had the car, but I never had the Ghostbusters firehouse. Or the Ninja Turtles sewer.
Like the environments, because that was the big purchase. Like, anybody could get the action figures, but it was the environments that were, like, that was the thing that made you cool.
Those G.I. Joe toy commercials were the best because it was always two kids standing behind this sandbox somewhere, or like this table full of sand, and you had the environment, like trees on the pond. Well, speaking of marketing and Ninja Turtles, I was part of the 2012 reboot, and man, oh man, that thing at the height of its success, I think the statistic was they were selling, at Walmarts across America, they were selling a toy every 5 minutes for a year.
That's incredible.
For a whole year. Every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes?
If you think about it, though, it was totally, especially when it first came out, it was unlike anything that was on the market. So even if you consider, like, Star Wars, those kind of static figures, or you consider He-Man, like these sort of super buff, masculine, but really kind of serious action figures, there was a kind of, like, playfulness to the Ninja Turtles. And I think that really resonated with a lot of people.
I love how many rip-offs that Street Sharks, Biker Mice from Mars, Samurai Pizza Cat. Like, if you saw something that you couldn't have as a kid, do you think that you would fork over the bucks now to own it just to say yes?
So I'm pretty good at controlling myself in that way. The one thing
too.
That does
not really.
The one thing that really does honestly resonate is, like, Star Wars.
That was the one for you?
Totally. My favorite toy when I was a kid, it was actually a small Star Wars figure of a stormtrooper that I stole from my brother. And I never told him that I took that from him. And
he's going to watch this.
I know. Yeah, totally, right? Well, good for him. But I used to, like, shove it into my pocket and carry it around with me. And for some reason, I love that stupid stormtrooper.
What would you say is the best toy line of all time?
The best toy line? Oh,
I mean, you did talk about He-Man, but I feel like that's coming from a nostalgic. I know your brothers were into it, but...
Polly Pocket is kind of like, as a concept, what the hell is up with that? but I love them. There's almost like too many.
Yeah, but
to choose from.
You're absolutely right about Star Wars. It's like just when you thought they thought of it all, Baby Yoda.
I know, right? Like, look at the comeback they're making. It's incredible. Baby Yoda is everywhere. One of the things that we see now is that the mediums have shifted. So now broadcast television isn't like children aren't engaging with it to the same extent, but it's the online arena that's really taken over.
Right. And but as far as like rules there now, I mean, it's, we often look at online as being like the Wild West.
Right.
New media, and they won't show us the numbers and all that stuff. What are they hiding? I don't know. But like, how has that changed in regards to advertising and marketing?
Well, I think you're right to say that it's a bit of a Wild West. That's a really good characterization. There is like traces of regulation, but it's really, really hard to like monitor. In the past, one of the things that was criticized was that children can't tell the difference between like a commercial and a program. Now it's that kids can't tell the difference between a commercial and a review. So, for instance, there's Ryan's World. This is basically like an 8-year-old who has a YouTube channel where he reviews toys.
Oh, right. Okay, so this is interesting because I have a 5-year-old.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, like unboxings.
Totally.
And that is so crazy. I'd never really thought about it that way, in a sense that you're watching this kid YouTube star that is opening boxes of toys and reviewing them and getting them delivered to the front door.
Yeah.
Is that you fast forward a few years later in Ryan's case, that it goes from being a YouTube show about opening toys and unboxings and reviews, and then, now he starts to do his own adventures.
Yeah.
Now he has his own show on Nickelodeon. And now you look at the videos now, and it's him unboxing or playing with toys of his own brand.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts and opinions and views and your experience in that? And have you seen anything that you can recall that sticks out to you?
I mean, the numbers in this respect are kind of mind-boggling, right? Back in the day, it was just about TV broadcast and the number of viewers that you could capture live in a half-hour segment. But now, I mean, if you think about Ryan's World, the guy has over 30 million subscribers.
Oh my gosh.
And a grand total of, this will blow your mind, like almost 50 billion views.
What?
For Ryan's World. Yeah, it's astonishing. And his YouTube channel actually targets like your kid, right? Preschoolers between the ages of 2 and 6.
My son still likes to go outside and play. He still loves toys. He still likes getting gifts and goes to the toy aisle at Walmart or Target. But I think now more than ever, it's more of a digital age. How has that affected these brands and these toy companies from making their, reboots and remakes? And what are the worries that they face? Or there's no worry at all? I don't know.
It's really interesting in the sense that like a lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. So we've got new platforms, like, new avenues through which to reach the child. But if you look at something like, say, Paw Patrol, right? Paw Patrol.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Yeah, exactly. Sure,
I don't know what Paw Patrol is. No, it's insane how, again, and that's like a Toronto-based toy company, Spin Master.
Spin Master, exactly. And they're like enormous right now. So Paw Patrol is like the #1 preschool property. I mean, it's not just a TV show, it's toys, it's video games, it's a film that came out earlier this year. Yeah. They actually have deals with VTech to create like educational games, but also with Danone, so you can buy yogurt,
dog-flavored yogurt,
cheese curds too. Nice,
what?
Right? Yeah, cheese curds.
for your Paw Patrol poutine, which
totally.
is,
Oh, that actually sounds good. I would totally eat that.
Ace is on the case.
But yeah, I mean, we're kind of extending, so it's not just like digital platforms where you can reach children, but like brand extension has kind of expanded the scope of all of these different brands. So we live in a culture now where we're literally surrounded by it. Like in the 80s, it was Gen X, and now it's Gen Alpha. So Alpha, like Latin, first of its kind. It's like a generation that has never seen this extent of digital engagement. And it's super alarming for a lot of people, as you can imagine, including parents like
including
yourself.
me.
And the other thing that really appeals to kids of that age is toys that engage with nurturance of some kind. So they're accustomed to being taken care of, but with nurturance toys, they can now occupy that like aspirational adult role.
I was going to say, speaking to kids, and kids always want to be older than they are.
Always, exactly. And I mean, we might think of this as being a really gendered concept, so like little girls with dolls. But if you look in the tech realm, that's a really good way of taking this concept of nurturance and making it unisex. So Tamagotchi is a great example of this. Like kids love Tamagotchi regardless of gender, but it gives them the opportunity to take care of something. So they're now in this position of mastery, and it gives them a sense of power. So that's consistent across any generation, whether you're Gen X or Gen Alpha. And I think marketers consistently appeal to those characteristics.
So have PLCs changed because companies just have found better ways to get us to buy things?
Not really. I mean, PLCs are fundamentally, there's a concept called Toyotic. So we would call them...
Oh yeah, no, that is huge.
Yeah.
And especially when you're pitching a cartoon show.
Absolutely.
Like, it is something that is, I've heard that term among my colleagues passed around.
Definitely.
I mean, as much as they try to drive and strive for authentic stories, they're always looking for that. Is it toyetic? So
Yep.
Can you walk us through or explain that kind of, that lingo?
Yeah, so toyetic is when you determine whether or not something is suitable for merchandising and toy licensing. And that's exactly what, well, it actually starts with Star Wars. That's where the concept comes from. It was one of the guys at Kenner who first used the term. The reason Star Wars was in part so significant was because it completely revolutionized the toy industry. So it comes out in 1977, like just in time for that Gen X latchkey kid. And the movie did well, right? We all know that. But what the movie made was nothing in comparison to what the merchandise made. So 6 years after the first release, the merchandise made $2 billion. So it proved that by linking merchandise to media properties, you could be a wild success. The other thing that they did too, in terms of trying to be toyetic, is dolls up until this point were about 12 inches in size. So Barbie was 12 inches. The G.I. Joe dolls, which originated in the 1960s, they were 12 inches tall too. But if you want to sell an entire world, so you want to sell not just the characters, but vehicles and environments, you can't do that with a 12-inch doll. It's just going to cost way too much. So they shrank the standard size of the action figure down from 12 inches to 3 3/4 inches. And suddenly you've got a tiny figure that can actually inhabit these entire worlds. And it was massively, massively successful. So with G.I. Joe, for instance, another PLC from the 1980s, what they decided to do in order to kind of cash in on the success that Kenner had with the Star Wars dolls, because Kenner had the Star Wars contract, was they said, we'll bring back our action figures, but we're going to shrink them down. So they shrank them down to 3 3/4 inches. They were like, this is a military narrative. It's going to have a lot of merit during the, era of Reagan patriotism. And they say, we'll actually offer double the number of action figures. So where Star Wars had about 92 or so, G.I. Joe came out with over 200.
Oh my God.
It's kind of cashing in on the collectability factor that they knew was really big with tweens at that time.
Collectability, you say? So, like, for instance, the not only did I have the original Luke Skywalker toy, but I also had the one with the optional green lightsaber. Right. They had all these variants.
Yep.
Photos of Obi-Wan on the 3/4, the headshot photo, like
totally.
And that was I can't even imagine, that was the original, and then there was the re-release because they re-released the movies in theaters, and it just goes on, and now I'm poor. Well, our guest today has been Selma Purac. Thank you so much for sharing all this great information with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Say goodbye to Canada.
Bye.
Whoever's watching out there.
Hey guys, if you like more of the behind-the-scenes stuff and extended interviews, then we have just what you're looking for right here. Check out these videos right around here. And be sure to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned.